The house smelled of lavender and memory. Everything was too quiet, too still, except the sound of the clock ticking on the wall like it was trying to remind Elena that time moves on, whether you want it to or not. Her grandmother, Margaret Halley, had passed away 4 days ago, peacefully in her sleep, in the very room where she had nursed Elena through chickenpox, heartbreaks, and college rejections. The woman who had been her mother in every way except biologically was gone, and Elena felt hollowed out. The funeral had been simple, exactly as Margaret wanted. No drama, no speeches, no black veils. She had written in her will. Just a soft hymn, her favorite jasmine flowers, and a closed casket because no one needs to see an old woman dead. Remember me alive. And now they were here. In the cold, overly air-conditioned office of Mr. Bramley, Margaret's longtime lawyer, who looked just as summer as the occasion demanded. Elena sat in one corner of the long mahogany table, shoulders tight, hands folded. Across from her were her parents, Clara and Stephen Whitlock, and her younger brother, Liam, who couldn't stop fidgeting with his phone. They hadn't even cried at the funeral. Elena, Mr. Bramley began gently, as per your grandmother's final will and testament, signed and notarized 2 months before her passing. She has left her entire estate to you. Elena blinked. I'm sorry, what? She's left you everything. The house, the land, her investments, stocks, personal belongings, art collections, everything. As of today, it amounts to approximately $28 million. There was a beat of silence. Then her mother spoke, sharp and loud. That's impossible. She wouldn't do that. She was lucid when she signed it. Mr. Bramley nodded. Absolutely. In fact, she was very clear and deliberate. She said, and I quote, Elena is the only one who has ever loved me for me. Not for what I gave, but for who I was. Her father laughed bitterly. This is absurd. That money is family money. We took care of her. That should be split fairly, among the whole family. You visited her twice in the last 5 years. Elena said before she could stop herself. Stephen's face darkened. We were busy providing. Paying for everything. No, you weren't. Elena's voice cracked, and she didn't care. She paid for everything herself. I saw her bank statements. She even covered my college tuition when you said you couldn't afford it. And she never told me until I graduated. Clara narrowed her eyes. So this was all part of her manipulation, wasn't it, turning you against us? She raised me. Elena snapped, feeling her voice shake. While you were out hosting cocktail parties and building your perfect image. I wasn't good enough for your friends, your lifestyle, but I was good enough for her. Mr. Bramley cleared his throat uncomfortably and slid a sealed envelope across the table. There is one final letter she wrote only for Elena. Elena picked it up with trembling hands. It was her grandmother's handwriting, flowing, neat, and unmistakably hers. The room seemed to vanish as her family began arguing, voices rising, slinging words like selfish, manipulated, and ungrateful. But Elena was no longer listening. She opened the letter. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, it means I've gone home to the stars. Don't cry too much. Remember, I had a good run. I watched you grow into the woman I always hoped you'd be. Kind, strong, and full of quiet fire. You might be wondering why I left everything to you. The answer is simple. Love, you gave it freely and never once asked for more than a hug or a cup of tea. The others, well, you saw them for who they were long ago. I know they'll try to make you feel guilty. Don't let them. This is your legacy now. Not just money, but my trust. Use it to build the life I couldn't. Dream, travel, fall in love when you're ready, and never shrink yourself to fit into anyone else's version of who you should be. And if the burden gets heavy, remember, silence is sometimes the sharpest blade. I love you forever. Grandma tears slipped silently down Elena's cheeks as she folded the letter and held it close to her chest. Her family was still arguing. Liam looked more irritated than upset, scrolling through his phone and sighing loudly. Clara was hissing at Stephen about lawyers and media damage control, and that's when it hit her. Her grandmother had known this would happen, known Elena would stand in that room, alone even among blood. But she wasn't alone. Not truly. She walked out without saying a word. No fight, no argument, just the envelope in her hand and her heart aching, but clearer than it had ever been. Outside the building, the autumn wind bit at her cheeks, but the sun was still shining, and Elena smiled just barely. She hadn't just inherited wealth, she had inherited truth. And that would be the foundation of everything that came next. The first few weeks after the reading of the will were a blur of cold shoulders and loud accusations. Elena quickly realized that the family she once thought she belonged to was now a battlefield where she was the enemy. Her parents transformed overnight, their smiles vanishing, replaced by icy glares and thinly veiled contempt. Clara cornered her in the kitchen of their childhood home, voice shaking with false sorrow. "Elena, don't you see? This money was never yours alone. It belonged to all of us, to keep the family together." Elena's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "Grandma left it to me, Mom. She knew why. I'm not sharing something that was never meant for you." "But you have to," Clara whispered, eyes pleading like a child denied a toy. "For the family's sake, you can't just take it all and walk away." Her father was worse, cold and calculating. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, he sat Elena down with a legal letter in hand. "I've spoken to lawyers. You don't have to give me anything, but this inheritance could be contested. If you want peace, we can settle." Elena's heart sank. They were ready to drag her through court, drag her name through mud, all for what? Money. Her brother Liam was crueler still. Within days, he unleashed a tirade on social media, accusing Elena of greed, of tearing the family apart over cash. "I guess $28 million makes you forget where you came from," he wrote, with a photo of them as kids. Comments flooded in, some supportive, many vicious. Everywhere Elena turned, whispers followed. Cousins who once played with her on summer afternoons suddenly avoided her gaze. Aunts called, their voices thin and cold. Uncles asked pointed questions at family gatherings, as if she were some stranger who had stolen from the tribe. She had lost them all. The isolation cut deeper than any financial fight. But what hurt most was the gaslighting, the way her parents tried to twist reality, until she doubted her own memories. "You're selfish," Clara said during one of their phone calls. "Grandma worked hard for all of us. How can you be so ungrateful?" "Mom, she told me exactly why," Elena replied, voice trembling. "I was the one who cared for her, who listened. You were never there." Silence, then a voice dripping with bitterness. "You're just like your father." Flashbacks haunted Elena's nights. She saw the empty chairs at her birthdays, the unanswered calls, the Christmas mornings she spent with only Grandma's warm smile. She remembered Margaret sitting by her bedside when she was sick, whispering stories of strength and love. How her grandmother had sacrificed quietly, shielding Elena from pain and disappointment, and she remembered finding a hidden box in Margaret's closet weeks ago. Inside were journals filled with thoughts and regrets, letters never sent, dreams unfulfilled, and one final note: "Elena is the heart of our family, even if the others can't see it." After months of turmoil, Elena made a choice. She needed distance, not just from her family, but from the life that had become poison. She disappeared. No social media, no calls, no explanations. She packed a bag with essentials and boarded a plane to a small coastal town she had dreamed of visiting since she was a child. There, she stayed in a modest cottage, walking on sandy beaches, journaling, and healing wounds she didn't fully understand until she had the space to breathe. She found peace in silence and strength in solitude, but she wasn't running away forever, not anymore. Elena returned 6 months later, transformed, no longer the quiet girl overshadowed by family drama, but a woman armed with clarity, purpose, and a fire burning softly beneath her calm. She carried with her more than just the inheritance. She carried the legacy of a grandmother's love and the promise that she would honor it on her own terms. When Elena returned, no one recognized her at first. Gone was the timid girl who once cowered beneath her family's judgment. In her place stood a poised woman whose quiet confidence made a room shift when she entered. She had a new name for business purposes, Elena Harris, but to those who knew her, she was still Margaret's granddaughter. Using a small portion of her inheritance, Elena launched the Margaret Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to children who had been abandoned or overlooked, to young creatives with no support, and to elderly women living alone, just like her grandmother had once been. The foundation's headquarters was in the city, an old building restored with care and vision. Its walls were decorated with Margaret's paintings and photos of her garden, an homage to the love that had sparked Elena's mission. Meanwhile, her family was unraveling. Stephen's once solid investments faltered, his arrogance replaced by desperation. Clara's social circle dwindled, their whispered doubts turning to cold shoulders. Liam's influencer career crumbled under the weight of his own lies and failed sponsorships. Rumors circulated, quiet but persistent, that Elena's foundation had secretly acquired the deed to the Whitlock family home, heavily mortgaged and on the brink of foreclosure. It was true. One chilly morning, a letter arrived at their door, announcing the donation of the property to a shelter for abused and homeless women. The day Elena confronted them was nothing like they expected. Clara burst into tears, begging for a share of the fortune. "We're family, how could you do this?" Elena's voice was calm, steady, like the ocean before a storm. "You lost the right to call me family when you tried to take what wasn't yours." Stephen snarled. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," Elena said softly. "I'm just the woman Grandma always believed I could be. I used her inheritance not to destroy you, but to build what she dreamed of." She handed them copies of her grandmother's journals, words of love, sacrifice, and hope. "This legacy isn't for sale or for revenge," she said. "It's a promise to the past and a gift to the future." As the months passed, Elena's foundation flourished, changing countless lives. She visited the shelter she had created, watched children laugh, artists create, and elderly women reclaim dignity. Her family, they were shadows of what they once were, broken by greed and blinded by bitterness. But Elena, she was free. On the day of the foundation's annual dedication ceremony, Elena stood at the podium, her heart full but her eyes clear. "Grandma taught me that love isn't about possession," she told the crowd. "It's about kindness, courage, and the courage to stand alone if you must." Her voice carried the weight of every heartbreak, every betrayal, and every hope for a better tomorrow. And as the sun set over the city skyline, Elena smiled, not because she had won the battle, but because she had honored the woman who had never stopped loving her.